Okay, so here we go. I'm gonna rant. It's fine. Just, you don't have to watch this if you don't care. Okay, let's do this. Hey word nerds, Kate here, and today we're doing the thing I've been putting off for a while. I am reviewing what I've been calling in my script Trash Fire, the movie, or as most people might recognize it, Artemis Fowl. Yeah, it's happening, yay. I should clarify, I'm reviewing the 2020 movie, not the book, because the book is good and the movie ranks in the top 5 worst movies I've ever seen. It was so far removed from what I remember reading that as soon as the movie was over, I grabbed my phone, downloaded the Kindle version of the book, and read it in about 2.5 hours to replace the monstrosity of what I just saw. Haha, it's not what it's supposed to be. I watched the movie a while ago with my roommates, and shortly after the movie started, I opened my laptop, pulled up the sticky note feature, and started taking notes about all the things that bothered me. It turned into a very long list. Seriously, this is one of the worst movie adaptations I have ever seen, and I've watched Aragon and Avatar: The Last Airbender. I got about 3,000 words into an essay-type analysis of everything I thought was wrong with the movie and why it was so bad, only to realize that all I was doing was complaining for no reason about things that it seems like most people have already noticed. So strap in, folks, because this script is still over 1,000 words long, and I've slapped it all on a PowerPoint as a makeshift teleprompter, so let's just get going. Instead of a who knows how long rant about the movie, I decided to try and figure out where exactly the movie went so very wrong. There's enough bad about it that it really can't all be attributed to a single decision that the filmmakers made, but I think I can work out where a majority of the bad came from. It boils down to this. Artemis Fowl is not a good guy. I mean that in the most literal sense. Despite being the title character and the main character, Artemis Fowl is the antagonist of the first book of the series, and even throughout some of the other ones. Through the course of the 8-book series, Artemis changes, loses his memory, changes back, changes again, and makes slow progress towards becoming a good person. But throughout the first book, which this movie is supposedly based on, Artemis is unapologetically the villain. He kidnaps a fairy because he wants more gold for his family. That's it. There are no ulterior motives. And yes, towards the end of the book, he does make a deal with the fairies to restore his mother's health, but that's kind of an ancillary goal for him. And yes, his mother is in fact alive, and his father never appears in the first book, so right on there, movie. His only goal is to get more money because he feels his family is no longer rich enough. It's entirely selfish. And I really enjoyed that about his character. For all that he's a child genius, Artemis Fowl is still very much a child who acts on childish urges, like selfishness and not wanting to share. So many of the issues I have with this movie come from the fact that, for whatever reason, the filmmakers wanted him to be, I guess, relatable? I don't know. They decided to make him the protagonist instead of the antagonist. They had to make such major changes to both the plot and his character to justify this, but it all seemed rushed and not very well done. Part of the reason I love this book series, and especially the first book, was because Artemis was a complex character who made an interesting and hard-won journey from villain to hero. It took lots of time to accomplish that. And I guess their attempt to make him more, I don't know, relatable, they stripped out so much of what made him compelling. And I don't really know why Disney or whoever decided to do this. It's actually become something of a trend recently to have a likable, eventually redeemable villain. Think Loki or Zuko. Instead, you have the filmmakers pulling villains from later in the series and making things way more complicated than they need to be. When you have something like this, where you're trying to integrate magic and the modern world, it's actually kind of commonplace for authors to have their first book in a series be sort of more simple in plot, because then you have time to really establish the world and do some world building and help your audience understand what exactly they're dealing with here. And then as the books go on, they get more complex, and that's fine, but they tried to shove so much into this movie that none of it made sense. Ugh. Now, to be fair, there are a lot of awful things about this movie that don't trace back to this decision. They use like 2 or 3 different framing devices for the narrative. Artemis is handed every single piece of information he needs instead of having to figure it out himself, which in my opinion undermines his supposed genius. Trying way too hard to cram plot points from later books into this movie to set up for future movies. They don't spend nearly enough time on world building. They change entire characters for no reason. The pacing was so slow at the beginning and then so rushed at the end. They had a MacGuffin that was entirely meaningless. For those who don't know, MacGuffin is a term used in writing and filmmaking to describe an object that everyone wants, but kind of doesn't really do anything. It might sort of come in handy, but the plot revolves around this thing, and it's really more about the journey to get the thing than the actual thing they're getting. I could go on. Literally, I still have all the notes I took during the movie. In fact, I'm gonna share some of my favorites with you. I tried to only pick a few, but there were so many that it's gonna go on for a while. We knew this was gonna be a long, ranty video. Forced bonding over mutual missing dads. I'm calling it now. Followed shortly by, great, everyone is out to save their dads. That's new. Obvious setup for sequels is obvious and stupid. We're not spending nearly enough time on this movie. Where's the acorn lore? The fae lore? Seriously, Oren Kofler had this great lore about fairy magic, how they had to replenish their magic supply with a special ritual done at certain places, and how they integrated the magic with technology. That's how they captured Holly in the books, is because they knew that a fairy would eventually have to come to this specific site to do the ritual, and it's not pure chance. It's not just like, well, here's a tree, maybe a fairy will show up someday, who knows? Like, seriously, a huge reason I love the book series was how it explored fae lore, which, hey, not to shamelessly self-promote, but I recently did a blog post on that, so check it out! I have no interest in Holly or her motivations. She is entirely bland as a character. She's the goody two-shoes who follows all the rules except when she doesn't, so great. In all capital letters, nothing makes sense and I hate it. Everything about this movie is on such a larger scale than the first book. I hate it. It has nowhere to build to, so much for the sequels. Less Josh Gad, please. This is why the plot seems rushed. Like, I don't think that Josh Gad is a bad actor, but Mulch's part of the book, especially the first book, was so small. But they got in this famous actor, I guess, so hey, we have to feature him more, so let's make his part huge. So they expanded it for no reason, and like, wasted all that time on this small subplot that doesn't matter and completely ignored the main plot. Oh, this movie was so painful, you guys. We're not so different, I guess, they say, after spending 5 whole minutes together. All the subplots are taking up more space than the actual plot, and that actual plot is already thin to begin with. The effects with Mulch's mouth were probably the most horrifying thing I've seen this year on film, and I watched clips from the new Cats movie. This is seriously nothing like the book. I hate everything. If the villain knew where the MacGuffin was in the manor, then why didn't she just tell Artemis and ask for it up front? Are we friends? She asks, after saying how she doesn't trust him because he kidnapped her. Like, seriously? What? Of course, the dad is only stealing to help Ben protect people, because we can't have any of the good guys actually be bad. That would be, that's too much. Like, my final note after watching this movie was this. I want to throw my TV out a window. That's how much I hate this. So, if any of you are thinking about watching this movie, all I have to say is you are by far better off reading the book. Like, don't torture yourself. I'm so glad that this ended up on Disney Plus because I was fully planning to pay to see this in theaters, and I'm glad I didn't have to spend that money because it would have been a waste. But that's enough ranting for me. It was a lot, sorry. If you're interested in more of my words that are much less complainy, there's a link to my website below. Or you can find me on social media. I'm on Facebook, Twitter, Pinterest, Instagram, at Kate G. Jameson. Let me know in the comments if you've seen this disaster of a movie and what you thought of it. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and you will see me next time, word nerds, and I promise I'll be a lot more calm. Does anyone else hate the whole cliche of a villain who's desperate enough for something to kidnap someone for it, and yet is entirely unwilling to share what information they have to help the people who are clearly unqualified to get whatever it is that they want any sooner? Like, seriously? Use your heads!